In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Murdochville, Canada, life seemed to move at a leisurely and predictable pace. The soft hum of daily routines, from the morning rush to school and work to the peaceful evenings spent on front porches, painted a picture of serene domesticity. It was a place where everyone knew their neighbors, where children played safely in the streets, and where the troubles of the outside world felt distant, almost irrelevant. Yet beneath this calm surface, there were whispers, unspoken tensions and fleeting glances that hinted at something darker, brewing just out of sight. No one could have imagined that within the walls of one of these quiet homes, a storm was gathering, one that would shatter the illusion of safety and end in an unthinkable act of violence. Among the families who called this idyllic setting home was the Thompson household, a family that, on the surface, epitomized the ideal of suburban life. Robert Thompson, the patriarch, was a 50-year-old architect who had worked tirelessly to build a successful career. His achievements were reflected in the beautiful home he shared with his wife, Emily, and their 2 children. To anyone looking in from the outside, Robert seemed to have everything a man could want: a thriving career, a loving family, and a life that many would envy. Emily, Robert's wife of nearly 2 decades, was a 41-year-old woman who had been his steadfast partner through all the highs and lows of life. Together, they had built a life that seemed almost picture-perfect. Emily had devoted herself to their family, raising their children with care and attention, and managing their home with the same precision Robert applied to his architectural designs. Their marriage, which had once been filled with passion and excitement, had settled into a comfortable routine. They were a team, working together to navigate the challenges of life. But the fire that had once burned so brightly between them had slowly dimmed over the years. Beneath the surface of this seemingly unshakable marriage, however, small cracks had begun to form. The years of routine and familiarity had worn down the passion that had once defined their relationship. The early days of romance, where every touch and glance had sent sparks flying, had given way to a life of predictable patterns. Robert still loved Emily deeply, but he found himself yearning for something more, something that would reignite the flames of desire that had long since dwindled to embers. He was fond of his wife, appreciative of the life they had built together, but there was a part of him that couldn't help but feel as though something was missing. It was during this period of emotional restlessness that Jennifer, Emily's way younger sister, entered the picture in a way that would change everything. Jennifer, at 28 years old, was a vibrant and spontaneous woman, full of life and energy. She had always been close to Robert and Emily, frequently visiting their home and spending time with their family. Unlike Emily, who had settled comfortably into her role as a mother and wife, Jennifer was still searching for her place in the world. She admired the life her sister had built, but also envied it in a way she could never fully articulate. During one of Jennifer's visits, Robert began to notice just how different she was from Emily. Where Emily had become predictable, Jennifer was anything but. Her laughter echoed through the house, filling it with a lightness that had been absent for some time. Her energy was infectious, and Robert found himself inexplicably drawn to her. It started out innocently enough. Long conversations in the kitchen, while Emily was out running errands. A shared joke that only the 2 of them seemed to understand. Fleeting touches that lingered just a moment too long. What began as harmless flirtation quickly escalated into something much more dangerous. Robert's feelings for Jennifer deepened with each passing day, and she, in turn, began to feel the same way. The tension between them was palpable, a current of electricity that crackled in the air whenever they were in the same room. It wasn't long before they crossed a line that neither of them could return from. The affair was intoxicating, a secret shared between them that made the ordinary seem extraordinary. Each stolen moment, every whispered confession felt like a surge of adrenaline, something that both excited and terrified them. For Jennifer, the affair was a heady mix of emotions. She knew she was playing with fire, that she was risking not only her relationship with her sister but also her own sense of self. But she couldn't stop herself. Robert was everything she had ever wanted in a man, handsome, successful, and attentive in a way that the younger men she had dated never were. He made her feel special, important, as if she was the only person in the world who mattered. It was a feeling she had been chasing for years, and now that she had found it, she was unwilling to let it go, even if it meant betraying the sister she loved. For Robert, the affair was a dangerous addiction, one that he couldn't seem to break free from. He tried to compartmentalize his life, to keep his relationship with Jennifer separate from his marriage to Emily. But it wasn't that simple. The guilt gnawed at him, growing with each passing day. He knew he was betraying the woman who had stood by his side through thick and thin, the mother of his children. But the pull he felt toward Jennifer was undeniable. The affair had become a consuming obsession, one that overshadowed everything else in his life. Every time he looked at Emily, he was reminded of the lies he was living, the double life he was leading, and the fear that it would all come crashing down around him. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the weight of their betrayal grew heavier. Jennifer and Robert both knew that what they were doing was wrong, but they couldn't seem to stop. The affair had taken on a life of its own, and they were both caught in its grip, unable to see a way out. They had crossed a line and there was no going back. The storm that had been brewing beneath the surface was about to break, and when it did, it would leave no one unscathed. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the burden of their secret began to weigh heavily on both Robert and Jennifer. They tried to keep their affair hidden, but the little lies they told to cover their tracks began to pile up, creating a web of deceit that became increasingly difficult to manage. Every glance they shared, every touch that passed between them, every whispered word felt like a gamble with everything they held dear. The fear of what would happen if Emily found out was ever present, but so was the thrill of the forbidden. It was a delicate balance, one that they both knew couldn't last forever. And then, one fateful evening, the precarious house of cards that Robert and Jennifer had so carefully constructed began to collapse. It was a seemingly minor oversight, a small slip in their otherwise carefully guarded deceit, a forgotten text message left open on Robert's phone. The message, which had been intended to remain a hidden thread in their web of lies, was instead discovered by Emily, who happened to glance at the screen as she picked up the phone. Emily's heart pounded with a sense of dread as she read the words on the screen. The message was explicit, a clear and undeniable confirmation of the affair that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. As the reality of the text sank in, it felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The truth hit her with the force of a freight train, a crushing weight that seemed to drive all the air from her lungs. At first, she was in disbelief. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing, unable to reconcile the evidence before her with the life she had always known. The initial shock was followed by a profound sense of denial. Emily didn't want to believe that the life she had built, the trust she had placed in Robert, and the love she had nurtured for nearly 2 decades could all be shattered by a single act of betrayal. She found herself questioning the reality of her situation, desperately hoping that there was some alternative explanation that could make sense of the damning evidence. But as she reread the message and pieced together the fragments of her shattered trust, it became increasingly clear that the betrayal was not just real, but profoundly devastating. The confrontation that ensued was nothing short of explosive. Emily's emotions erupted in a torrent of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. She demanded answers with a voice that trembled, her words laced with a raw, piercing pain. The confrontation was not merely an exchange of words, but a visceral clash of hurt and betrayal. Emily's questions were sharp, each one cutting through the thin veneer of Robert's explanations and excuses. Robert, caught in the turmoil of the moment, attempted to respond. He tried to explain the nature of the affair, to justify his actions with reasons that now seemed pitiful and inadequate. His apologies were fervent but fell flat, failing to address the depth of the wound he had inflicted. The words he spoke were hollow, lacking the sincerity required to mend the breach between them. He realized too late that no explanation or apology could undo the damage or restore the trust that had been so callously violated. The weight of Robert's betrayal was magnified by the fact that it involved Emily's own sister. The realization that the man she had loved and trusted with her entire being had engaged in an affair with her sibling cut deep, shattering her sense of security and trust. It was a betrayal of the worst kind, one that left Emily grappling with feelings of inadequacy and disillusionment. The life she had thought was unshakable, a solid foundation built on love and mutual respect, was now in ruins. The pain and heartbreak she felt were overwhelming, and the future she had envisioned for herself and her family seemed to dissolve before her eyes. In the wake of the revelation, the dynamics between the three of them shifted dramatically. Emily, devastated by the betrayal, left the house, unable to bear the sight of either Robert or Jennifer. She needed time to think, to process what had happened. Robert was left alone, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a physical force. He had destroyed everything, his marriage, his family, his own sense of self, for a fleeting affair that now seemed more like a curse than a blessing. Jennifer, too, was left reeling. She had never intended for things to go this far, never imagined the pain she would cause. But now that the truth was out, she found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The excitement and passion that had once fueled the affair had turned into guilt and fear, and the consequences of their actions were becoming all too real. But there was more to come, for the story was far from over. As Emily, Robert, and Jennifer grappled with the fallout of the affair, the seeds of something even darker were beginning to take root, seeds that would lead to obsession, to madness, and ultimately, to murder. The days following Emily's departure were a blur of confusion and regret for Robert. Alone in the house that once buzzed with life and laughter, he was left to confront the full weight of his betrayal. He tried calling Emily, leaving messages of apology, begging for a chance to explain, to make things right. But each call went unanswered, and with every passing day, the hope of reconciliation slipped further from his grasp. Jennifer, too, was adrift. She had always been the more impulsive of the two sisters, living life by the seat of her pants. But she had never imagined things would turn out like this. The guilt was unbearable. She had destroyed not only her sister's marriage, but also their bond, something that had always been a cornerstone of her life. The affair with Robert, once thrilling, now felt like a poison coursing through her veins. As the days turned into weeks, something inside Jennifer began to change. The guilt that had once consumed her started to morph into something else, something darker. The more she thought about Robert, the more she realized that she couldn't bear the thought of losing him, not after everything they had been through. Her thoughts became obsessive, fixated on the idea that they were meant to be together no matter the cost. She began to visit Robert more frequently, at first under the pretense of checking on him, making sure he was okay after Emily left. But her visits became longer, more insistent. She would show up unannounced, bringing meals, offering to help around the house, anything to stay close to him. Robert, too, worn down by guilt and loneliness, didn't have the strength to push her away. He accepted her presence, if only because it was easier than facing the crushing silence alone. But Jennifer's presence was more than just a comfort to Robert. It was a lifeline to her. She clung to him, desperate for the connection they had shared during the affair. She convinced herself that what they had was real, that it could be something more, something lasting. And the more Robert tried to pull away to distance himself from the affair, the tighter she held on. It wasn't long before Jennifer's behavior began to shift from supportive to possessive. She started questioning Robert's every move, demanding to know where he was, who he was with. If he didn't answer her calls immediately, she would bombard him with messages, each one more frantic than the last. Robert began to feel suffocated, but he didn't know how to stop it. He was too consumed by his own guilt and fear to confront Jennifer, too afraid of what she might do if he pushed her away. And there was more. As Jennifer's obsession deepened, she began to isolate herself from everyone else. Her friends, her work, her own life, all of it fell by the wayside as she devoted herself entirely to Robert. She convinced herself that if she just tried hard enough, if she could just prove her love to him, he would eventually come around. But Robert's reluctance to rekindle their relationship only fueled her desperation. The breaking point came one evening when Robert, trying to salvage what was left of his life, decided to reach out to Emily one last time. He called her, hoping against hope that she might pick up, that she might still be willing to talk. To his surprise, she answered. The conversation was strained, awkward, but there was a glimmer of something there. Maybe not forgiveness, but the possibility of a future where they could at least coexist, where they might find some way forward. Jennifer, who had been hovering nearby, overheard the conversation. The realization that Robert was still trying to mend things with Emily sent her into a tailspin. All of her fears, her insecurities, her obsession, they all came crashing down on her at once. She couldn't lose him, not now, not after everything. In a moment of blind panic, she decided that she had to do something, anything, to keep Robert with her. That night, she confronted Robert, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "Why are you still trying to talk to her?" she demanded. "I thought we were moving on, that we were going to be together." "Jennifer, this has to stop," Robert replied, his voice weary. "What we had, it was a mistake. I need to make things right with Emily. I can't keep living like this." But Jennifer wouldn't hear it. "You're just going to abandon me? After everything we've been through? After everything I've done for you? Jennifer, please. You need to understand," Robert began, but Jennifer cut him off. "No! You need to understand," she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "I gave up everything for you, Robert. Everything. You can't just walk away from me." Robert tried to calm her down, to reason with her, but it was no use. Jennifer was beyond reason. The obsession that had taken hold of her had turned into something uncontrollable, something dangerous. She couldn't see past her own desperation, couldn't fathom a life without Robert in it. But there's more. The argument escalated, both of them shouting over each other, the tension in the room reaching a fever pitch. Robert, desperate to end the conversation, turned to leave, but Jennifer grabbed his arm, her grip tight and unyielding. "You're not leaving me, Robert," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Not now, not ever." Robert tried to pull away, but Jennifer wouldn't let go. At that moment, something inside her snapped, the fear of losing him, the desperation to keep him. It all boiled over into a rage that she could no longer contain. Without thinking, she grabbed a nearby lamp and swung it at Robert. The blow caught him off guard and he staggered back, hitting his head on the edge of the table as he fell. The room seemed to freeze in that instant, the only sound the thud of Robert's body hitting the floor. Jennifer stood there, the lamp still in her hand, staring in horror at what she had done. As Robert lay motionless on the floor, Jennifer's mind raced. What had she done? The man she loved, the man she had given everything for, was lying there because of her. Panic set in, her heart pounding in her chest as she knelt beside him, trying to rouse him, to make him wake up. But it was too late. The damage had been done, and Robert wasn't waking up. Reality hit Jennifer like a tidal wave. She had killed him. The man she had loved so desperately, the man she had been willing to sacrifice everything for, was gone. Her obsession had led her down a path of no return, and now there was no escape. She was trapped in a nightmare of her own making, and the consequences of her actions were about to come crashing down around her. As the enormity of what she had done began to sink in, Jennifer did the only thing she could think of. She ran. She fled the house, leaving Robert's lifeless body behind, her mind a whirlwind of fear, guilt, and disbelief. But no matter how far she ran, there was no escaping the truth. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the life she had known was over. But the story doesn't end there. Jennifer ran through the night, her heart pounding as the reality of what she had done began to set in. The cold air stung her face, but she didn't notice. She was too consumed by panic and fear. She had killed Robert, the man she thought she couldn't live without, and now she was a fugitive from her own life. The adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her moving, but she knew she couldn't run forever. She drove aimlessly for hours, the roads blurring together as her mind raced. Every turn she made, every street she passed, felt like she was being drawn deeper into a labyrinth with no way out. She thought about going to the police, confessing everything, but the thought of spending the rest of her life in prison terrified her. She thought about going to Emily, begging for forgiveness. But how could she face her sister after what she had done? There was no place left for her to go, no one left to turn to. As dawn began to break, Jennifer found herself parked on the side of a desolate highway, staring blankly at the horizon. The reality of her situation weighed heavily on her. Her life, once so full of promise, had unraveled into a nightmare she couldn't escape. The affair, which had once seemed like a thrilling escape from the mundane, had destroyed everything she held dear. And now, Robert was gone, his life ended by her own hands. She knew she couldn't stay there forever, but she didn't know what to do next. Her mind was a tangled mess of fear, guilt, and despair. In her desperation, she reached for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed Emily's number. She didn't know what she would say, but she needed to hear her sister's voice to find some semblance of solace in the midst of her turmoil. The phone rang several times before Emily finally picked up. Her voice was groggy, as if she'd just woken up. "Jennifer, what's going on? It's early." "Emily," Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what to do." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Jennifer could almost hear the wheels turning in Emily's mind. "What happened?" Emily asked, her voice now laced with concern. I did something terrible," Jennifer admitted, tears streaming down her face. I hurt Robert." "What do you mean you hurt him?" Emily's voice grew more urgent. "Jennifer, where are you? What's going on?" But Jennifer couldn't bring herself to explain. The words caught in her throat, choking her. All she could do was cry, the enormity of her actions finally crashing down on her. "Jennifer, please talk to me," Emily pleaded. "Tell me where you are. We can figure this out." But Jennifer didn't know where she was, not really. She was lost, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. The guilt was too much, the weight of it pressing down on her until she felt like she couldn't breathe. She had destroyed everything: her relationship with Robert, her bond with Emily, her own sense of self. There was no coming back from this. As Jennifer sat there, the phone still clutched in her hand, a sense of numbness began to creep over her. She had run out of options, out of hope. There was no undoing what she had done, no way to make things right. The only thing left for her to do was to face the consequences of her actions, whatever they might be. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke again. "I'm sorry, Emily," she said, her voice hollow. I'm so sorry." "Jennifer, please." Emily's voice cracked with emotion. "Just tell me where you are. We'll get through this together." But Jennifer didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she hung up the phone, leaving Emily in a state of panic and confusion. She knew her sister would try to find her, would try to help her, but it was too late. Jennifer had made her choice, and now she had to live, or die, with it. In the days that followed, the news of Robert's death spread quickly. His body had been discovered by a neighbor who had become concerned after not seeing him for several days. The police launched an investigation, and it didn't take long for them to piece together what had happened. Jennifer was the prime suspect, and a warrant was issued for her arrest. But by then, Jennifer had disappeared. She had abandoned her car on the side of the road and vanished into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Search parties were organized, and Emily, frantic with worry, joined in the efforts to find her sister. But as the days turned into weeks, the hope of finding Jennifer alive began to fade. Emily was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life: the betrayal by her husband and her sister, the loss of the man she had once loved, and the uncertainty surrounding Jennifer's fate weighed heavily on her. She struggled to understand how everything had gone so wrong, how the people she had trusted most could have caused so much pain. Months passed, and Jennifer remained missing. The police eventually scaled back their search, and the case grew cold. Emily, unable to find closure, was left with a void that nothing could fill. She visited Robert's grave often, seeking solace in the only way she knew how, but the pain never fully went away. The scars left by the affair, the obsession, and the tragedy that followed were deep and permanent. And then, one day, a hiker stumbled upon something deep in the woods, a small makeshift camp that had clearly been abandoned for some time. Among the scattered belongings, they found a journal, its pages filled with Jennifer's handwriting. The entries revealed the depths of her despair, her overwhelming guilt, and her inability to live with what she had done. The final entry was short, almost cryptic. I can't live with the guilt anymore. I'm so sorry, Emily. The discovery of the journal led the searchers to Jennifer's body, lying peacefully beside a creek. It appeared she had taken her own life, unable to cope with the consequences of her actions. The news brought a bittersweet end to the ordeal for Emily. Closure, but at an unimaginable cost. In the end, the affair that had once seemed so thrilling had destroyed everything it touched. It had torn apart a family, ended 2 lives, and left a trail of heartbreak in its wake. The story of Robert, Jennifer, and Emily was a cautionary tale of how obsession and betrayal could spiral out of control, leading to devastating consequences. But even in the midst of such tragedy, there is a final haunting reminder. No one is immune to the darker impulses of the heart, and when those impulses take hold, the price can be more than anyone is willing to pay.